Thank you for joining us on Talking Security with Caliber, where we bring to you some great individuals, some security experts, people with some knowledge that they want to relay to you, that they want to help you in whatever domain it is that they have a level of expertise in. And one of the things that we do is we ask them, what is it you want to talk about? And so that's what we try to do, is we try to bring you the right people with the right information. And with that, today I have Sam Masiello. Sam, how you doing, man?
Great, Tab. How are you?
Doing fantastic. And I'll let you do an introduction of yourself, just so people kind of know who you are. But Sam and I go way back. Like I think, Sam, it's almost been like 2 decades, right?
Pretty close to that. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Pretty close. And so, I think when we met, it was I was a sales guy, and you were. It might have been like on the cusp of coming into security or just into security. But I just remember us walking from the hotel to the restaurant where some people were getting together, and that was our first conversation talking, and I can just remember going. We were in Denver, right? And I hadn't been to Denver a lot, and I'm out of breath, and I'm just like, what the heck, man? I'm like I'm not that old. I'm like, why am I out of breath? And I just remember being concerned about that. And you're like, don't worry about it. It's the elevation, and anyway, it's kind of weird sometimes what we remember.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a long time, and I'm happy to be here today, and happy to have this conversation, and hopefully we can impart something useful upon your listeners.
Yeah, man. And I said in the intro that, we like to come to give you or give our guests the chance to talk about what they want to talk about. But I kind of inflicted this topic on you. I mean, let's just be honest. I kind of said, hey, you know what I'd like to talk about? And part of the reason, what just for the listeners, what we want to talk about is, kind of like, hey, so you want to be a CISO, you want to be a leader in an organization. Somebody wants to do that, and I thought that was an interesting topic because over the years I've seen you go from entry into security to being a CISO, and that pathway that it took, and I just thought that was kind of an interesting discussion of like, okay, what's the path look like, and then once you get there, is it all rosy and rainbows and unicorns? So kind of with that, maybe you could tell us about how did you even get started in security?
So I'm a little bit different from the way most folks got into security, right? Most folks who are in security today, and I'll say that it's different now because there's a lot of college programs that are geared around getting into security. It's more security programs, there's more guidance in order to be able to get at least into an entry-level type of role as you're coming out of college. When I started doing this over 30 years ago, there really wasn't that, right? People were either in IT roles and possibly were given security as a side job, and realized they actually enjoyed it and they loved it, and they continued on their pathway and became successful security folks. Mine was a little bit different in that, so I started running my first messaging systems at the age of 13, and I always loved technology. Right? I got my first computer, a Commodore 64, when I was 6 years old, and I loved writing little basic programs on that thing, and that's how I kind of got started in computers in general. But when I started running this messaging system at the age of 13, I realized, wow, this is really cool stuff. And I started to get involved in understanding a bit more about how networks worked, and I started to see how bad guys started to leverage those things for their own gain. And to me, it was just fascinating. And so that's when I knew, even at a pretty early age, that security was what I wanted to do. Now, security back then was very different than what it is today. There's no token ring networks anymore, and now we have the internet and all these other sorts of things, and massive interconnectivity. But I've known since pretty early on that this is what I wanted to eventually do. And so the things that I did along the way were things that I felt were preparatory towards being able to do that. I mentioned earlier, writing basic programs when I was young. Kept up with software development along the way. I got my degree in computer science, and so learned how to code, learned how to write programs. learned how to write applications, and so I understand that side of it from an application development and security perspective. And I've had the quite frankly the blessing and the privilege to have a number of roles along the way that really kind of paved the way for me, and I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people who were able to help guide me along the way as well. Never underestimate the value of things like networking, and never underestimate the value of things like mentorship, because really those go a long way towards developing not only who you are but what you are as a person, but also your own drive as well as you progress in your career. But again, knowing pretty early on that this is what I wanted to do, I was able to take opportunities along the way that really paved that path. And so I've worked for security research organizations. I worked for McAfee for a while as one of their heads of security research within the McAfee Labs organization, which is really where I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different technologies, right? Because back then, McAfee is really kind of they had email, they had IDS systems, they had all sorts of other things that they acquired along the way. And having the opportunity to work there, I think, is what really took my experience level from what it was and really exploded at that point, right? Just because the amount of breadth I was able to gain with respect to knowledge and products and how things worked, and the opportunity to have the chance to speak on those things. I've done a lot of public speaking in the past. I know we've been at quite a few conferences together where one or both of us had been speaking at, and the opportunity to be able to speak on those various topics really forces you to become an expert relatively quickly, because of the fact that you're going to stand in front of people and they're going to ask you questions and they expect you to be able to answer those questions. So really the opportunities that I've had along the way to be able to get exposed to different things and learn about different things along the way really helped shape where I'm at. And then my role today, I'm the CISO at a holding company, basically a private equity firm. And so I feel like the companies that I've worked at along the way, whether it was the security research organizations, I've been in large online retail, I've worked for large call center organizations, manufacturing, worked at a law firm. And so I think all of those really put together positioned me well for this role because of the fact that I have experience in companies large and small. I have experience with companies who have lots of legacy infrastructure, companies who are on the bleeding edge of technology. And so all of that put together really, I think, shaped well, again, the opportunity I have today to work with companies that in our portfolio are also very large, very small, have lots of different needs from a compliance perspective, have lots of different things that they're working on from either a bleeding edge technology standpoint all the way down to companies that really aren't very technology focused at all. And so we need to work with them on how to build a security program with a set of employees that doesn't really have a whole lot of technical expertise, right? So being able to help foster some of that along the way is an interesting challenge of the role I have now.
Yeah, there's several things in there that you said that that really resonate with me, and I don't know, looking back, because there's some of the things that you've done, I've done, not like directly in security, but when you start talking about networking, or you start talking about finding mentorships, or you talk about speaking. I don't know. At least for me, I didn't go out and say, I've got a master plan. I'm going to network. I'm going to seek good mentors. I'm going to speak because it's going to lead me. Like Mr. Burns on The Simpsons. Ha ha ha! Excellent. I mean, like is it gonna lead me to that high level? And for me, I didn't do that. Did you do that? Was that planned, or was that just the nature of who you are, and you got out there, and then that led you to that?
It's kind of a mixture of things, right? So I think it's part of who I am. I'm quite a bit of an introvert by nature. So, I mean, going out there and networking, really isn't the most comfortable thing for me, but it's something where, if you want to achieve the growth that you're looking to achieve, you have to sometimes get outside that comfort zone. If you had asked me before I started doing any public speaking if it was something I wanted to do, there's no way I would have said that's something I would have enjoyed. But once I started doing it, I realized, wow, I actually have a knack for this thing and actually enjoy it. One of the things that I also was considering from a career path perspective outside of security was being a teacher. In fact, when I was in high school, I was part of a prospective teacher program where I got to actually go to some schools as part of my high school day and work with teachers and work with their classes. And so one of the things that I've found really interesting about just the development of my career and being able to go out and do public speaking is that I've actually been able to scratch both itches with respect to, being a security and technology professional and being a teacher, because when you're standing up on stage, you really have the opportunity to be able to teach people and get people to think about security or whatever topic you're talking about in different ways. That's one of the things that's most satisfying to me when I'm up on stage is seeing people take notes. Because if you see them take notes, that means they're writing something down that you said that either struck them in some way that was important to them or resonated with them, or you got them to think about something in a bit of a different way. And that's actually a great way to start networking too, because a lot of times after those talks, you end up having people come up to you afterwards and you learn more about them and you learn more about their company, you learn more about what they do, because they want to learn more about what you just spoke about, but at the same time, you want to learn more about them too. And so it's a great kind of organic way to be able to start to network with folks, aside from, going to the big chapter meetups for ISSA or ISACA or whatever, right? Those are great too. But, and I'm not trying to diminish the value of them, by at all, because I think they're great opportunities to meet a lot of different people. But a lot of times some of that networking becomes organic, where people are coming to you because they want to learn more about what you have to say, while at the same time you want to learn more about them and who they are. And so it really has helped foster that, I'd say, some networking opportunities that probably wouldn't have come about otherwise. And quite frankly, I may not, as a more natural introvert, may not have go out and sought myself.
Yeah, totally. Like neither here nor there, just curious. But have you spoken and then anybody ever come up and go like, "Hey, can I get a picture with you"?
Not very often. Not very often. No.
But once that starts to happen, then you realize like, wait, I think I shifted into mentorship, right? And
Yep.
when you're on stage, you've shifted to mentorship.
For sure.
And that it's that's the start of a person having the opportunity to grow into a leadership role, into a CISO type role. The reason why I really focused on what's about the networking, about the mentoring, about the speaking, is those things really, and it's I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you this: very rarely do I talk to somebody in security and they go, "I am an extrovert." I am a full-on extrovert. I mean, I am, but I come from a different side of it. But that it's a fear that people have, is like I want to be in leadership. I want to advance my career, but I want it to be on the merits of the work that I do, not the extracurricular networking, mentoring, speaking things. But those are the things that really start to propel an individual. And it gives them greater insight. It gives them different experience, different views on things, and it helps them to get seen. And those are, it's this really weird thing where it's like people want leadership, right? But they don't necessarily want to like do the hard thing, like get in front of people. And so that's a challenge. And another level is social media, right? I mean, it's like there are some people in security that are really good at just getting out there and just front and center. And, all of that really plays into it, right? And so, when you look at your career, at what point, was there a point in time when you just said, hey, I mean, did you start, because you said you always wanted to be in security, or 6 years old, or, as long as you can remember, most people wanted to be firemen, which is weird that you wanted to be in security, but that's cool that you actually stuck with it. But was there a point in time, and it probably wasn't at 6 years old, when you went, they're going to create this thing called a CISO, and that's what I really want to be at 6 years old? I'm being funny. But was there a point in time when you realized that you wanted to make that shift into leadership?
I don't know if there was a specific point in time, but certainly as I continued to progress in my career, one of the things that became obvious to me was and this kind of touches to your point on leadership and being in front of people, right? Is that I think a lot of people who are in technical roles who eventually move into leadership roles have this same sort of epiphany type moment. But if you're going to start moving into leadership, there's other things that become important other than your technical expertise, right? Anybody can be a great technical person, right? And there are lots of people who have been in technology for a long time, who have never been in leadership, who are really, really good at what they do.
Absolutely.
And those people are extremely important, and we have to have those people because we as leaders rely on those people a lot. But when you want to start moving into a leadership role, there's a couple of other additional things that you need to learn. And they're either things that you innately do or can do, or they're things they're skills you have to learn. But you have to learn, first of all, how to be able to speak not technically, right? And sometimes that's hard to do when you have been brought up and studied and had your career focused around your ability to understand and speak technology. Mm-hmm. And now you have to shift and say, all right, if I'm going to be able to work with other leaders within the organization that are outside of technology, I need to be able to speak their language too. And that's a very different language to speak, and sometimes a difficult hurdle for people to cross over when they're moving from a very technical role to more of a business role. Because security is certainly one of those where I think people have had struggles in that regard because of the fact that the security leadership roles have really evolved over the past 15 years or so from ones that were highly technical, right? It was okay 15 years ago for the CISO to be just a technical person, right? And just focus on security and know all the technical ins and outs, be able to speak all the technical jargon. But as we've been looking at gaining a stronger seat at the table with the business leaders and being able to help them understand why security is important and what are the things they need to be worrying about to understand risk and what that risk means to their organization, we need to be able to speak in a different language and be able to speak in different ways. And so that's a leap that, like I said, a lot of people need to make in order to be able to be successful in a leadership role, is being able to speak that language of business. Because once you start getting into that capacity, you're reaching across the business, or at least you should be reaching across the business if you're going to be successful in your role. And second, when you start moving into leadership roles, the other thing that people don't necessarily realize is, going back to the mentorship conversation, the amount of time that it takes to manage people. Right? Sometimes people that are in technical roles, they move into leadership roles, and they're just like, okay, I'm in charge now, and these people work under me. Well, there's a lot more to it than that, right? There's a lot more soft skills you have to develop. There's a lot more ability to be able to be empathetic and work with people on a different level than you were when you were just peers. And so there's a huge aspect of that comes into leadership that is also sometimes difficult for people who are very strong technically to be able to adjust to. Just because of the fact that not only are they looking to you to help forge their career path and help forge what their job is going to evolve into, right? So you need some foresight into what a well-run department is going to look like, but at the same time, as their leader, especially when you have junior people on your team, they're looking to you as a mentor to help not only define that career path, but help them get there, right? What are the things I need to do? What are the things I need to learn? And how can you help me as a senior leader to be able to help me get there? And what are the skills that you can impart upon me? What are the trainings you would recommend I go to? And so there's a whole different element and aspect to becoming a leader that is well above and beyond just the technical abilities of your role.
And that kind of is an interesting thought. How much, and just guess, right? I'm not asking you for like anywhere near exactness, but how much of your role now is actually security related versus the management, the soft skills, the either dealing with the people or working with management? Because I think that might help people, because if somebody's like really, really technical, they're like, I love security, I love doing the work, I want to be a CISO. And it's like, but if you take that away from them, do they really want to be a CISO? Mm-hmm. So how much? I would say
a vast majority of my time, if not maybe 80-20, maybe not more, is spent on working with my people, working with leadership, working with management, not only within my company, but also the portfolio companies that we have as well. I work very closely with the CISOs and the security leaders and technology leaders within our portfolio companies. And so I spend a lot of time working with them on strategy, roadmap, other projects that they might be working on, helping develop relationships with partners that could help them. And so there's a pretty large, I would say, not only business development aspect to my role, but also just an overall management aspect to the role, where I'm working with people much more today than I am doing any sort of hardcore security. I think the technical work that I've done in the past helps me understand what I need to know relative to people working with those technical leaders on the level that they need me to work with them on. So having that strong technical background is extremely important. But I would say most of my time today, a vast majority of my time today, is spent more on the management side of it and working with the board and setting priorities with the board and working with our other technical leaders in our portfolio, much more than it is doing any sort of hardcore security these days. Yeah. But again, having that foundation is extremely important, because if you don't understand that aspect of it, you can't have those conversations with your technical leaders.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at the portfolio companies that you have and those discussions that you have technical people that are inside those portfolios that you, I'm sure, have to work with to help mentor them on good security practices or guiding them, as you said. And so when you first started out, like, hey, maybe I want to be in leadership, right? Whenever that thought crossed your mind, there's no way in the world you were like, oh, one of the things I'm going to have to do is know how to communicate with the portfolio companies and their potential, people. And so, one of the things that I'm hoping that this gives people is a little bit more eyes wide open, right? Of like, hey, it's there's a lot to it, right? It's not just showing up to work and just like, if anybody needs me, I'll be here. And then you put your feet up on the desk and, you just are like, yeah, this is what I've been waiting for. This glory moment of getting paid to do nothing. It's amazing. Yeah, you laugh and you're like, that's awesome.
That sounds great. It'd be nice to be able to get there someday, but that's not happening in this field.
Yeah, even like 10 minutes, right? Like just like I'm gonna pretend for 10 minutes that's my life, right? I mean, but because you got so many things that you have to do.
To that point, though, I think one of the most important aspects of this role, though, is you also have to have really an insatiable desire to learn, right? Because this is a field where the landscape is changing every day, right? There's always something new that threat actors are doing to try to, whether it's phish users or get into networks or steal data or whatever. And the analogy I like to use a lot of times with my folks is security is like a snowball rolling downhill, in that snowball gets bigger and bigger every day and becomes more and more complex every day. And if you're not running to chase after that snowball, it gets further and further away from you and becomes harder to potentially maintain or corral or whatever your goal is to do with it, right? But if you're standing still, right, it gets further and further away. It becomes more and more difficult to be able to manage. And so you have to always be in that mindset, like, what am I going to learn today? What's going to be new today, right? To your point a few moments ago on, putting the feet up on the desk and like, yeah, this is great. I'm sitting here doing nothing, right? If you're standing there doing nothing, you're the one standing at the top of the hill while that snowball gets further and further away from you and bigger down the hill. So to me, being a person who has that insatiable desire to learn really is an important aspect of this role, because as I've told folks that I've worked with before in the past, I said, if you haven't learned something new today, you probably haven't tried hard enough to find something, because there's regardless of all the news outlets that are out there and all the blogs that are out there, right? There's always something new to learn from somebody, because somebody is seeing something different every day that somebody else hasn't seen before.
Yeah. And you didn't say, you talked about learning, but you didn't mention it. You didn't mention taking action, but everything that you said was built around taking action. When I said, put your feet up for 10 minutes, and you're like, yeah, but go learn, go do this. Yep. And that's one of the things, and call it a trajectory of my career, call it, becoming an old dog or whatever you want to call it. One of the things that I've learned is, I remember being like first in my career and looking up at the top of the hill and going, those guys, whatever, and I was down here, I looked down here. I find it interesting that the people that can impact you, that can impact an individual the greatest, like you can inside your company or you can outside your company, are people that take action, people that learn, and people that can make decisions quickly. And what I find is, sometimes when we're at a lower level of just learning or just getting started or whatever, it's like we wait. We wait for something to find us. And I go back to when you and I first met. And man, you're out there networking. I mean, you're out there, seeking mentors. I'd run into you at conferences all the time. I mean, I'd be like, "Oh, hey, there's Sam." I mean, that's how we became close, because that closeness that we built was not a snapshot in time at us walking to that restaurant. That was the start of something beautiful. No, that was the start of a relationship. And it started because of networking, mentoring, you speaking, me speaking, us being out there, learning, taking action. And those are the things that, that people have to be willing to do. And they have to be okay that that's what they want to do. I mean, if you want to be a CISO, if you want to be in leadership, and you're like all those things that Tab just said in that summary, man, they just, like nothing pains me more than all the things that he said. It's perfectly okay to focus your career as a security doer, whatever that, engineer or whatever that is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, I do think, though, I want to talk about how long, the start of your career to your first job as a CISO. Do you remember how long that took?
It took at least 10 years. At least 10 years. And I think that's an important aspect of understanding the path to becoming a CISO as well, right? Because I've talked to folks who have said, I want to get into security and I'm going to take this class and I'm going to start off as an entry-level person, but my goal is to be a CISO within 5 years. And I'm like, holy crap, right? I mean, to your point a moment ago, right, on being able to make decisions quickly. Part of being able to make decisions quickly and being able to make good decisions quickly, right? Maybe I'll qualify that as well, because I guess lots of people can make decisions quickly and make really bad ones. But the ability to make good decisions quickly is based on a foundation of experience and knowing what has happened in the past and being able to have the foresight of what potentially is going to happen in the future, which I'll say is also an important part of being in a leadership role in security. Is your board is looking to you and your executives are looking to you to understand not only how to solve the problems that are happening today, but how do you solve the problems that are going to be happening in the future? And I realize sometimes that it's hard to predict, given, as you mentioned, actually, we talked about it the other day, about Moore's Law, right? And the rapid pace of change in technology. Well, security has to follow that same curve. And so your executives are looking to you to understand, based on that experience, what is going to happen in the future. So I want to make sure we mention that as well, but because I thought that was an important aspect of being able to kind of move into that leadership role. But as far as the length of experience is concerned, I've had people say to me, "I want to be a CISO within 5 years," and I think, "Holy crap! Do you realize how little you will know? I mean, you'll know a lot, right? But how little you will know across the entire spectrum of security within that 5-year period that." You're not ready at that point. I mean, maybe you're ready to move into a management type role, right, where you've had enough experience, where you feel like you've learned enough where you can mentor individuals on your team. But I turn it around this way to folks. And I say, so if you were the CEO of a company, would you want the CFO, the person who's managing all of your financials for your organization, and the one who basically decides whether if you're going to stay in business or not, or how you would stay in business, to have 5 years of experience? Like, how would you feel if the person you just hired to run the finances of your organization only had 5 years of experience in finance? Like, that would be a horrible position to be in if I was a CEO. And so I would expect my security leader to be in the same position, right? To have enough experience behind them where they can effectively autonomously lead my organization, because as the CEO or as a CIO or as a CTO or as another leader within the company, I'm bringing you in as the CISO, as a security leader, to understand enough about your domain so that you can autonomously run your function without necessarily having to be told what to do. And if I was a CFO with 5 years of experience, I wouldn't think I would know nearly enough to be able to effectively run and manage my organization. So it's important to set proper expectations with folks, because I think people realize that, or people think in some regard that, once you get into security, there's some like fast track to getting into some leadership role, and it's not the case. I mean, maybe in a smaller company, they might be willing to elevate you a little bit faster just because of the fact that you may be the only one on the team. But if you're going to come in and be expected to run a team, manage an organization, set a strategy, manage a budget, work with executives, work across the business, I mean, that's not a role that someone who only has a couple of years of experience in security can take on effectively.
Yeah. So we're coming close to kind of closing this thing up, but I think one of the things that, and I don't want to sound overly like Pollyanna or however you say it, where I'm like, enjoy the journey. But sometimes we if somebody wants to be a CISO, like have that as your goal, but kind of understand what it takes to get there, and to get there prepared and ready, and not to just get there. Because sometimes I think people think if I get there, it's just going to be amazing, and it's going to be the best day of my life, and I'm going to like sit it back and I'm going to be like, yeah, I arrived. So not to put a negative spin at the end of this, but are there anything that you would like say, hey, man, I had no idea that I was going to have to do this, and be prepared that if you want this, you got to be willing to do this thing. Is there anything like that?
That's a good question.
Deal with stupid vendors that ask a bunch of questions all the time, like, oh, he's bugging you all the time. Like,
well, yeah, be prepared. Be prepared for the flood of phone calls you will get on a regular basis from vendors who think they have, the solution to your organization, and because they work with lots of other companies like yours, even though they know nothing about your company in and of itself. I think there's a couple things I would say that really is important for people to realize, especially if they want to move into a security leadership role, and that is, firstly, don't take anything too personally, because remember, as a security leader, or a leader of any function, right? Really, you are a business leader at that point as well, and there will be decisions that are made that are for the betterment of the business, that are maybe risk-based decisions that may not necessarily be the best security decision. And I find people early on that get very frustrated by the fact they're just like, why can't we just do this? We should be doing this. That would provide better security. Like, yes, it might, but at the same time, you may also be introducing hindrances to part of the business that, when you weigh the risk of that decision versus the cost of that decision, may not necessarily balance out. And so I find people get very frustrated sometimes early on in their careers because they're like, why aren't we doing this? Because this is the right way. When in fact there's an entire business discussion that happens around that decision as well that may require you to go in a different direction. Or from a business perspective, it may be an element or an amount of risk that they may not be willing to accept. So I'd say, if anything, that's one of the biggest things I try to consult people on early in their career to help them get over, because that can be something that, and I've seen it happen where people get so frustrated with people not wanting to do the right thing in their regard, kind of burn them out of security because of the fact that they feel like the company doesn't care. And I think that's also when you get into leadership roles, and I found this in security as well, because largely security is a cost center, right, for most organizations. And so sometimes one of the more frustrating things that we butt up against, and I think one of the more challenging things that we have as leaders, again, coming from a technical background and learning to speak that language of business, is establishing the rapport and establishing the relationship such that the business understands where you are coming from as a security leader in an attempt to try to procure the budget that you are trying to receive for your organization. And I realize there's always budget conversations that happen across all various business units, but sometimes security feels like they have a bit of a more difficult time having those conversations because sometimes they don't necessarily do a good job of understanding how to articulate that risk to the business. And so sometimes one of the more frustrating things that you encounter as a CISO is having some of those conversations with the business to help convince them of why we need to invest additional money towards whatever it is we're trying to do. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, right, the CISO is tasked with protecting the most critical assets of the business. But again, at the same time, there are conversations that have to be had at the business level to help balance that risk with that investment. And so sometimes that can be a very difficult thing for security leaders to adjust to, because while we all just want to make sure we're doing the right thing and make sure that we're protecting the secrets of the organization and the data for the organization and keep us compliant as best we possibly can, sometimes we need to be creative in how we are approaching those situations because of the fact that we may not get the budget for the gold-plated Cadillac tool that we want to get. We may need to find other ways to solve the same problems with less. Less investment, lesser tools, different tools, but still be able to be as effective in our jobs. And sometimes that's hard. And quite frankly, I would say what I've seen with a lot of CISOs leads to some burnout, where people end up getting frustrated in the role because they feel like, again, as we were talking about earlier, companies aren't willing to do the right thing when, in fact, they're really just balancing the needs of security and compliance with the needs of the business as well.
Awesome. Hey, Sam, thank you. Man, I love this conversation. I love the insight. I love the direction. I'm hoping that people out there will take the time to listen and to learn. And if they want to reach out to you, now, they can find you on social. If they want to reach out to me to have these discussions, they can have it on, they can reach out to me. But Sam, I just want to say thank you for being here. And this was unbelievably valuable.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.